I feel like this particular talk I've been working on for literally 60 years. My whole life, this has been a core issue, and I think it is a core issue for a lot of pastors and leaders. And if it's not a core issue for you, I guarantee you it is a core issue for several of the people on your team. So, do you guys have the show in the UK, Superman?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I was a small kid, the original Superman show came on, was a regular show, and Superman was, during the day, Clark Kent, who was a journalist at a newspaper. And then when the need would arise, he would go into the phone booth, which now young people, they don't even know what a phone booth is, right? They hardly, but at least in the States. But they would go into a phone booth and he would transform into Superman. And I can still remember, hearing the words of the announcers. He would say, he's faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. And he was like kind of the first real superhero. But he had one problem, one thing that could bring him down. It was this mysterious, mythical substance, green, gooey substance called kryptonite. And that whenever he was around kryptonite, it would bring Superman to his knees. And this particular topic that I want to talk about for a few minutes, I think has been kryptonite for me and for a lot of people I know. But the good news for me anyway, it represents one of the biggest transformational breakthroughs I feel like I have experienced in the last 20 years. So let me just start with the statement that you see there in your notes. Be yourself because everybody else is already taken. And who would think that it would be so hard to just fulfill those two words? I mean, be yourself. I mean, what could possibly be easier than just being yourself? It doesn't take a certain level of gifting or IQ or education. Like if there's anything I ought to be able to crush, it should be being myself. But all of us know that is not as easy as it sounds. And I think if you go back, and I've done a lot of work on sort of family of origin, genogram, family history, and you go back, and for a lot of us, as we trace our family of origin issues, we begin to discover that early on in our lives, whether it's a parent or a grandparent, a coach, a teacher, that people's voices begin to shape us, and we begin to play the game in order to get responses from people that we want, or that we think they want, and things that validate or affirm us as individuals. But there's a Latin coat of armor that has on it a phrase that I think gets to the core of this issue, and it's these three words, esse quam videri. And it simply means this: to be rather than appear to be. And I think in ministry, it is hard for us to authentically be who we are at our core and not live according to all the voices or demands that tend to shape our sense of identity. So 2 Corinthians 7, Paul has this interesting verse. He says, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit. That some things that are dangerous to your soul are not physical, tangible, literal. They are things inside of us, poisons inside of us, contaminations and things unhealthy inside of us that will poison our soul. And so part of my journey over the last 20 years has been to actually slow down enough and create the space. I'm going to talk more about this, but the whole issue of creating space so that I can be reflective and grow in my self-awareness has been a huge part of my growth. And I believe, as I've worked with a lot of leaders around the world, the lid on their leadership is not their communication ability, and it's not their strategic thinking gifts, it's their lack of self-awareness. Yes, lack of self-awareness becomes a major lid for a lot of leaders. And so I put there in your notes this statement: every person needs to discover their sealed orders. It comes from a little book I read where the authors were talking about that when you were conceived, it's like God handed this envelope to you, and in that envelope contained these sealed orders. And the authors made the point of saying the sealed orders are not a task that you are to complete, but it's your own unique way of being in the world. And that just struck me. to discover not just what I'm supposed to do or what job I'm supposed to perform or what church I'm supposed to serve, but who am I at the deepest core of my being, so that when I am functioning from that, I am fully alive and I am living out of my sweet spot. So with that sort of introduction, let me just share with you 3 realities that have been part of this journey for me. And here's what I would say number 1 reality is. Every person in the room is more insecure than we want to admit. Every one of us is more insecure than we want to admit. And I would say just part of being part of the human race. I remember being in my 50s, and my wife and I had been invited to a neighborhood party with 6 other couples. And these were really intelligent, gifted individuals. And once we got to the party, kind of the guys grouped up in one group and the ladies grouped up in another group. And we were chatting, and it was one of those kind of conversations where it just never seemed like there was a good opportunity for me to jump in and chime in and say anything that would add value to the conversation. And so finally, at one point, one of the guys, just out of the blue, just turned to me and said, "I want to know what you think." And I drew an absolute blank. I had nothing, literally. And I stumbled and mumbled and made some lame comment that would not have been tweet-worthy in any environment. And then the conversation moved on. But then the shame storm started inside me. And I remember thinking to myself, "You're such an idiot. Here's this moment to contribute to an intelligent conversation, and you got nothing to offer." And here I am in my 50s, and I'm just overwhelmed with this sense of insecurity. And maybe you've been there in the same way. David Benner says, "In all of creation, identity is only an issue for us as human beings." We had a dog named Baxter, and I'm not really an animal person. My wife loves wildlife, animals, dogs. So we had Baxter 16 years. He passed away a couple of years ago. But Baxter was to me, is if you're going to have a dog, he's the perfect dog, because I always said he was one step above a stuffed animal. He didn't bark. He didn't make messes. He got along with people. He was awesome. And in all the years we had Baxter, we never once had to send him to therapy. Never once had to have him work through his genogram or, his family of origin issues, his daddy issues, none of that. He was completely comfortable in his skin. And sometimes I go, I'd like to be like Baxter. Just so comfortable just being who you are without any pretense or facade, right? But for us, it's way more complex. So I put in your notes, approval addiction, though, is for a lot of us in ministry, it is our kryptonite. And I look back, especially now at age 66 and early years in ministry, that this had such a significant issue and had such an unhealthy grip on me. So I remember when I told you I started pastoring when I was 23. Our church had on Monday nights a prayer meeting. And it was partially to pray, but it was also an opportunity for people in the church to come together and just chat about stuff in the community. And so on this particular night, I don't know, I'd been there maybe a year. I'm still this young kid pastoring. And we began talking about a church that was 5 miles from us. And they had lost their pastor. And people were wondering, hey, do you know if they've got a candidate yet? And so one of the guys in my church says, "I'm thinking about applying because I can't imagine any job easier than being a pastor." Now, I know it was good-natured banter, but as a 24-year-old kid, I remember there was a couch in the room. I was sitting on the couch, and even to this day, I can tell you exactly what crossed my mind. What crossed my mind was, I'll show you guys. I will work harder than any pastor you've ever had. I'll be here first. I'll go home last. You will never accuse me of being a lazy pastor. And I set out to prove myself to them, to prove things to them they never asked me to prove. But something got triggered in me in that Monday night prayer meeting that was a deep issue in my soul, because I needed people's approval to prove that I was enough. And one of the internal scripts of my life that's been a driver for a long time is make sure everybody has a good opinion of you. And I think for a lot of pastors, that's a deep struggle, right? And that sense of we don't want to disappoint people. And most of us, we're people. Like we have good diplomacy skills. We get along well. We know how to lead meetings. We know how to interact with people. And so we know how to do this. But I've always struggled with that. And again, I think it's rooted in this whole approval addiction. So how do you get better at this? If insecurity, and it does reside in all of us at different levels, how do you get better? So that brings me to the second reality. This has been part of the breakthrough for me. Healthy leaders are differentiated leaders. So differentiated leaders. It's a psychology term, but I think it's a biblical concept. And again, I would say to you, this has been a long, long journey for me. So it's one of those things that I don't think you see much progress from Tuesday to Wednesday, but when I look back over the last 20 years, I've seen transformational breakthrough. And here's a definition of differentiation. It comes from Steve Cuss, great little book on managing leadership anxiety. If you haven't read it, Steve says, differentiation is the ability to be fully yourself while also being fully connected to people. So on the one side, a healthy leader is able to be really connected to people. And I feel like, so when a healthy leader walks into the room, the vibe they give off is not, hey, here I am, but the vibe they give off is, there you are. Yeah. I see you, you're known, you're valuable, and you have my full attention. And I think that that's what a healthy leader, the kind of the vibe that they give off. But on the other side of the equation is, I don't have an unhealthy need to find my significance from you. So I can be connected to you, but I don't need something from you that is going to fuel something unhealthy in me, which is that your opinion of me determines what I think of my identity, or it shapes my sense of significance. I'm not held hostage by your words or by your criticism of me. And I think about John the Baptist in John 1, when he was asked, who are you? And I think sometimes people ask, who are you? And I can go back to all the different voices that have shaped my life, right? And so John the Baptist, he says, well, are you Elijah? No. How about, are you prophet? No. And again, people want to put all these labels on you, right? Things that they want you to wear. And he says, no. He wasn't going to let all these outside voices deter him or detract him. And then I think the next 5 words he uses in John 1:20, every pastor probably ought to have tattooed on their arm. Mm-hmm. I am not the Messiah. Probably be good for you occasionally to remind yourself and other people that I am not the Messiah, right? And I think Jesus was the ultimate example of someone who is differentiated, fully connected, present, didn't look past people, loving toward them, full of grace, but never held hostage by people's opinions. So the next statement there in your notes, differentiation will help you have a non-anxious presence in an anxious world. If you guys have never read the book, The Failure of Nerve by Edwin Friedman, it's a great read. He says the leader's chief tool of influence is their presence. And we want to learn how to have a non-anxious presence in an anxious world. And man, are we living in an anxious world right now? It's around us everywhere. And when you are different, this is really important, I think, this isn't in your notes, but when we are differentiated, God is our primary connection, people are our secondary. I think for most of my ministry, I flipped that. I really lived for people's approval, what they thought of me, what they thought of my preaching or my leadership or whatever. And then sort of God was second. But I think when you are a differentiated leader, you're like, no, I'm really clear. Like I'm like John the Baptist. I'm not going to wear the labels other people put on me. I know my calling. I know my assignment. I know who I am. And I'm going to live from that place. So that differentiated leaders are both calm and courageous. I'm that non-anxious presence, but I'm also courageous because I don't need something from you to know who I am or what my assignment is. Isn't that good? So helpful. And I feel like with you guys, it's even more important because you're living in such an anxious-ridden world right now. And it's so complex and stressful that we have to learn how to. That's why I wanted to do this with you today, because I'm going, this has been such a huge game changer for me. And I think for living today, if you don't learn how to be a differentiated leader, I'm not sure you're going to make it for the long haul. And Jesus, in John 2, because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover, many began to trust him, but Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. I go, that's a differentiated leader. So here's the third reality, and this is where it gets real practical. The stakes are incredibly high for you and everyone that you touch. So I want to talk about, on the negative side, what's the price tag we pay, I've paid many times when I've not been a differentiated leader. So consider the price tag when we aren't differentiated. So let me walk through these, and you might just put a star or an asterisk by maybe the one that you go, that's one I better pay attention to. So here, let me walk through this quick list. We overfunction. I wish I had known this term 30 years ago. Overfunction is, I do things for people that they can and should do for themselves. How many times as a pastor I have been the one to ride in on the white horse and rescue the situation? Oftentimes overfunctioning because I wanted to be applauded or affirmed or needed, right? Sort of codependent. Secondly, when you aren't differentiated, you give praise and criticism too much weight. Okay, this one resonates with me so much. I remember reading years ago, when it comes to people in ministry, compliments are written in the sand and criticism is written in wet cement. Right? Someone praises your sermon and 15 minutes later it's gone, but that nasty email or that snide remark, it just grinds on your spirit for days and weeks, right? Oh my gosh, I have lived there so much. And when you find too much value in what other people say and think, you end up working really hard at being a diplomat and accommodating people in order to mitigate and minimize criticism. And the result is you don't really learn from criticism what you need to. So I think if you want to learn how to be a differentiated leader, you need to invite uncomfortable conversations. So about 2 years ago maybe, I got a call from a guy that had been on my staff 20 years ago. He was a worship pastor. And he said, I'm coming through Colorado. You have time to have lunch. And so we arranged to have lunch. I met him for lunch. We spent the first hour just getting reacquainted, reconnecting, telling old funny stories about when we were on church staff together. And then he said this. He stopped and he paused and he said, there's always something I've wanted to talk to you about. You know what I thought? Oh, crap. Like, this is not going to be good. But I've been working on my soul for a number of years, so I'm coaching myself while he's about to unload on me. And I'm saying, okay, Lance, just listen. There's something you need to hear. And so sure enough, his next words were, you weren't very easy to work for. Wow. And then he just began to talk about my workaholism, drivenness, steamrolling over people, becoming defensive when I was criticized, putting projects over people, not really caring about the health of the team, just about accomplishing the vision. And I'm sure if you'd interviewed my staff, they could have added to his list. And it was hard to hear. But here's what I would tell you. He was 100% right. And what I walked away feeling is, this wasn't a leadership style issue. This was an emotional health issue that he was putting his finger on. And I needed to hear it. And I think when, in the past, I wouldn't have, because criticism, I would have explained away or rationalized or become defensive. And in this moment, I'd gotten healthy enough that I could learn what I needed to learn from his criticism and grow in my self-awareness. Next there is we live with an exhausting duplicity of image management. It is so draining to constantly manage your image and always make sure that you present the sanitized version of yourself that everyone will affirm. And like, I got to always have it together, got to always, say just the right thing. I go into a crisis situation, I need to be able to have the right Bible verse and the right pastoral word to make it all better. And it's exhausting to live that way, right? And again, I would go, a lot of that is driven from the fact that I wasn't willing to be a differentiated leader. I remember I had been at a hospital with a family in our church, and one of their relatives was about to pass away. And so I left like at 10 o'clock at night. I said, hey, if they passed during the night, because they were right at the point of death, I said, call me. So my phone rang. This was back before we had cell phones, landline. The phone rang in my bedroom. It was 2:30 in the morning. And I answered the phone, and they said, Pastor, we're so sorry to wake you, but we know that you said to call, and our relative has passed away. But when they said, hey, we're so sorry to wake you, you know what I said? I said, oh, I wasn't asleep. Like, it was 2:30 in the morning. I just lied straight out to them. Because I think in the back of my mind, it was like, I'm not supposed to sleep. I'm a pastor. I should be praying or reading my Bible or memorizing scripture. But it was so deep in me. I just lied. I mean, it wasn't a nanosecond. I said, oh, I wasn't asleep. I know you're going, you are sick. And I get it. And this is called group therapy. So. All right, let me give you the next one. It messes with your motives. Because instead of asking what's the right thing to do in this situation, you get preoccupied with thinking, how will this make me look and what will people think? And I can't tell you how many times I have not had the hard conversation because I didn't want to rock the boat, or more deeply, I didn't want people to dislike me. So it will jack with your motives if you aren't differentiated. Look at Galatians 1:10. How clear is this? Obviously, Paul says, I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. If pleasing people were my goal, I would not be Christ's servant. It's like, wow. How sobering is that? All right, a couple more. We aren't courageous with our convictions. At times you won't say the right thing or be the prophet of God that you need to be because you don't want the disapproval of others. Next, bad behavior goes unconfronted. I think church is one of the biggest problems in church teams. We suffer with what I call terminal niceness. And we don't sit down and have hard, honest conversations with each other like mature adults. And we let bad behavior go unconfronted, or even sin go undealt with, because we don't have courage, and we don't have the courage because we don't want that person to dislike us. Patrick Lencioni, in some of his stuff on teams, says one of the reasons, really, if we get down to the core of it, that we don't confront bad behavior is it's not about the other person, it's really about us. And I don't want them to think poorly of me. And then the last one I'll mention is we become enmeshed. So our individuality gets lost either in our role or maybe in somebody else. And here's how Deborah Roberts defines being enmeshed. Someone in an enmeshed relationship is overly connected and needs to meet the other person's needs so badly they lose touch with their own needs, goals, desires, and feelings. I think some pastors have become so enmeshed in the role of being a pastor and all that comes with that and the expectations that other people load onto your shoulders that you don't have a clue who you really are or what you long for or what you're supposed to do, because you're so enmeshed in everybody else's stuff. And when we came out of Saddleback, one of the biggest shocks for us was Connie discovering how much her identity had been tied up in being the wife of a pastor. And she went into this deep depression because her individuality as Connie as a person had gotten lost in being the church, doing ministry with me in the local church. And so she had really lost her sense of individuality. All right, so let me give you 3 practical challenges out of this. Slow down to do the hard internal work. I think if you're going to be a differentiated leader, you've got to create space in your life. You've got to have seasons and times where you reflect and you read and do some of the hard work of examining, like, why am I triggered? What's behind that insecurity? Or why did I react that way in that team meeting? And I think it's only as you slow down that the Holy Spirit can begin to put the spotlight on the stuff that needs to be worked on. We've already covered this, but that lack of self-awareness has become a leadership lid for many people in ministry. You might just jot this down. I think this is worth remembering. Self-awareness is your best defense against self-deceit. Self-awareness is your best defense against self-deceit. Second practical challenge is understand your genogram. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but a genogram is a way of kind of on one page of mapping your family of origin and understanding what was the culture of your family that has now been passed on to us, and what are some of the assumptions and values and beliefs that we still carry with us. And often they're so subconscious and sort of in the water of our family culture we don't even realize it. And some of those things need to be broken so we don't pass them on to our kids and grandkids, so we don't pass them on to our team at the church. And so going back into your past to understand all of that can be very helpful in breaking some unhealthy patterns so you can be a healthy leader in the future. And then I would say, learn to manage the moment. So insecure thoughts and moments are going to show up at your door and knock on your door. You cannot help the fact that insecure moments are going to come knocking on your door. What you don't have to do is unlock the door, open it, and invite them in for tea and crumpets. That was very British of me, wasn't it? Very, right? And so I can't help the fact the thought's going to show up, but I can learn how to manage the moment. So I want to give you one of my most insecure moments. And you guys, as all pastors, you're going to relate to this. I was in a church in Houston. They were doing a series on prayer. And the pastor had asked me, could you continue the series? Like, do a message on prayer. I said, I'd be glad to. So they did multiple services, and I had just finished preaching, and just off to the stage, I walked off the stage, and they had a little green room off the hallway where the pastor could go between services to get a cup of coffee or tea or a bottle of water. So anyway, I leave the stage. I've just prayed, finished my message. The person gets up to make the closing announcements. I go in that room, and I grab a bottle of water and my phone, and I'm going to head to the lobby to greet people as they kind of leave. So I grab my phone, and up pops a text message. And it was somebody not in my contact, so it was just a phone number and then the first line of their text message. And this, remember, this is within like 45 seconds of finishing my sermon. Here's what the text message said. Weak and predictable. Now, you know, as a pastor, when you have like poured yourself into preparing a message, and the first like week, and I'm telling you, I remember I was walking out the door and I read that. I was like, every bit of insecurity in my body rushed to the surface. I just wanted to go over in the corner and get in a fetal position and just sit there for about an hour. So I opened my phone the rest of the way, and then it dawns on me what had happened. I had asked people during the service to write down the one or two words that characterize their prayer life. Yeah. So it says, weak and predictable. Hey, great message today. Very helpful. I'm thinking, could you have started with that? Oh, man. But it just reminded me like how deep insecurity is in me and how much I am attached to what other people think and how they view me. And believe me, I was not very differentiated in that moment. But here's the statement that has been so helpful to me. It comes from Viktor Frankl in his book, The Meaning of Life. He says, I want you to catch this. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space, there is the power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. I get to choose when those insecure thoughts show up. I have that nanosecond of time to decide, is this something I'm going to absorb or not? And so I don't know if you guys have read Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's a really great book, but he sends out this little weekly thing, and I read this from him the other day. I thought it applied here. When you drink water from a cup, it becomes part of you. When water falls on you like rain, it evaporates a few minutes later. Similarly, thoughts can be consumed or dismissed. Is this thought nourishing? Is this feeling something I should drink? Or is it more just like getting caught in the rain? You'll always feel the rain, but you don't have to drink the rain. You can let the thought pass, and in a few moments, the sun will return. Man, I love that. So let's close with this little story. The Boston Philharmonic Symphony played one Saturday night, and they got a standing ovation. And then in the next morning in the Sunday paper, there was the critical review of, a critic who had written a kind of a scathing review of their performance. So that week, one of the ladies who played in the symphony was interviewed by a journalist, and the journalist asked an insightful question. She said, how does it feel to play the concert on Saturday night and get a standing ovation from the crowd, and then turn around on Sunday morning and read the harsh words of the critic? And the lady in the symphony said, I learned a long time ago not to pay attention to either one. It's only the conductor who knows how I was supposed to play. And I thought, I have played my whole life listening to the crowd or the critic, when actually I need to keep my eyes on the conductor.